Trent Reznor and Nine Inch Nails have provided some of the most grim and gripping music of the 90s. Reznor lets the inherent strength of his music uniquely guide him, and he takes and uses modern studio technology to apply techniques which allow him to immerse himself in his songs emotionally. He likes to work alone because he gets intimidated by people. This exclusive interview gives a personal insight into what makes Trent Reznor the unique individual that he is. Writing is most important to him, and he needs input for songs which can have impact. Things which irritate or bug him are more likely to be inspirational and motivate him. The right environment also gives him the freedom to work without interference. Reznor knows how to set himself apart from the usual plethora of bands who take modern studio technology and either invent a new technique or overuse them to the point of redundancy.
I mean, it's different, but Pantera, all this really extreme music is in the charts now. What do you think about it, or why?
I mean, I'm pleased with that. I don't exactly know what to make of it. I think maybe from an American point of view, I don't know what it's like over here, but when, say, 3 years ago or so, when Lollapalooza and Nirvana and some other things started to make alternative music become mainstream music, and wiped out all the old LA metal bands, I think that was a good revolution in a way. But then the marketplace became flooded with bands that are not alternative at all, but got labeled that, like Pearl Jam, like Stone Temple Pilots, like the list goes on, of very mainstream bands, I think, that people were hoodwinked into believing are this new wave of interesting young bands that are basically just 70s rock bands with a new label on them that says, hey, we're cool.
But weren't these bands something different? And did they change anything?
I think maybe as it became popular to like stuff that was different, eventually people are starting to realize that there is some stuff that is a bit more subversive than that. You know, maybe we're in that category. I think Pantera definitely is. It's great to see that come out at number 1. Is it really changing anything? I don't know. I would hope that it does, because I think most of the music that's out right now is pretty boring and pretty safe and pretty prepackaged and corporate and lifeless. You know, and I think the spirit of rock and roll is dead for the most part, and it's been nicely sold and packaged and put into everybody's home via MTV, and it's a safe commodity now, and there's very few bands challenging anything or doing anything different. Yeah. And when some of them appear to be making it, I think that's a breath of fresh air. Yeah.
Did you think of something like when you released Pretty Hate Machine, because it kind of didn't fit in anywhere from the music side, and yet you had commercial success?
What did I think of that, or did I expect that? I just did a record that I was with Pretty Hate Machine, which was where I was at the time musically. It probably reflected the type of music that I was influenced by, which was like the Wax Trax label scene in America a lot, and harder edged synth electronic music. The mainstream American music at that time was guitar rock, just as it is now, you know. And when we put that record out, it was, you know, the label I put it out on hated it. MTV wouldn't play it. Commercial radio said no. Alternative radio, which was just kind of starting up, said no. No interest whatsoever. So we just started touring and opening for a lot of bands. We opened for Jesus and Mary Chain and Peter Murphy and anybody that would let us open for them, really.
So would you say that touring and live work helped establish the band?
And I think that it was because of that that we started to get together, and we got our live show together, and it became, I think, entertaining for people. And things just started happening, and slowly, I mean, in a period of 2 years, we went from nothing to platinum album with one record. And so in some ways it seems really fast, but the actual process of getting from point A to point B every little thing was kind of a cool little step up. Finally, some station decides to play a track, hit like a hole, and it goes on to be the #1 requested thing, and then another station then, oh, it's okay to play that song, so they do it, and a year and a half later MTV plays a song and claims that they're breaking new music first. It's completely full of shit, and then we have a platinum record somehow.
Do you think success was on your terms then? And it just wasn't hype?
It was kind of cool because I feel that it was on our terms, and I think maybe because it was a good record, or maybe because the band had something to say, it beat down the obstacles of having someone say, "You're good, I'll play you." And I think with MTV, there's a danger now where if the god of MTV, whoever that is, points their finger at you and says, "You're the next big thing," you are the next big thing, and they dictate to people what taste is, and they dictate what fashion is, and for the most part, people foolishly listen to them and believe it and buy it, and then they are the big thing. But when MTV then says, "Okay, we're done with you," you have to have something to stand on other than hype. And that same thing, I think, happens like with the British press. They'll pick a band, they'll hype the shit out of them for 6 months, and then they discard them, and if that band isn't really that great, they can't go anywhere from them.
Was it a reaction to the MTV aesthetics?
Yeah, it was, and I think they picked up on that, and so they don't play it. It was just kind of like, to make a video, I mean, coming from the point of view of, I'm in a rock band, or I make music in this past because I make music. That's what I enjoy doing. I didn't get in a band to make videos, and then, well, I have to have some music to go with it, Videos are kind of a necessary evil in the marketing of a record today, And so I've tried to turn that into a challenge, but, well, how can I make a video that's interesting? And you find yourself slipping into this thing where you can spend 10 times as much as you can record a whole album to make one video. And then you usually farm it out to some director that just churned out 50 other videos, and they all look the same, and they all look like the video that's the one that's being played all the time on MTV. And if it doesn't look like that, MTV won't play it, and if it has anything that's slightly controversial, they won't play it. And I've got a whole other 20-minute speech on that, on one we just did. And then you start thinking, well, I need to spend several $100,000 to make a video that can compete with Lenny Kravitz's video, so, and you start thinking, this is stupid, It doesn't need to be that way, at all. So with March of the Pigs, we started working on this video that was dumb, I got it done, and I thought, this is stupid, and this video is stupid, and it looks dumb, and it looks like every other video we've ever done, and what are we doing? And I thought the performance in it was good, but it was cut up so fast you couldn't see what was going on anyway, so I said, fuck it, let's just go in a rehearsal hall and play the song, one camera, record it live, no edits. So we did that. We played it about 15 times, took the one that was the least stupid looking, and that was the video. And I just kind of made it as a comment on, I thought that's my favorite video that we've ever done. And I know some people hate it, and other people come up to me and say, that was great, And then when I realized when we mixed it, it's 10 times noisier than the track on the album, and I didn't even realize that when I did it, and I thought, I wonder why they're not playing it. Well, next to the Pearl Jam video, it doesn't sound the same, which is fine,
Video with Jonathan Rice, this Happiness in Slavery. I never saw it here in Europe. I heard stuff about it.
That video came about, we'd just gotten free of being on the worst record label in the entire world, TVT, of New York, which its whole philosophy was to suppress you artistically no matter at any cost. And we got into a fortunate situation with the new record label where I could do what I wanted to do, and they'd leave me alone, and they respected me enough that they would do that. So that song came up, and I realized it wasn't going to be a big hit just because of the way it sounds. But I had an image in mind that I thought was a good metaphor for that song. And looked around, I was trying to find people that never did videos before, because why find someone that has done them, And I found John Reese, and he seemed like a pretty cool guy. And we started talking about this idea for this video, and we spent about a month hashing it out, back and forth, and refining the idea. And then we kind of realized it was going to be something that was interesting for us to make, and something that I'd be interested in seeing, but wasn't going to be able to be played on MTV, or fit the format of what a rock video was because of the content of it. And then we just thought, well, let's make something that's interesting as a film, you know. So we did it, and the first revision was a bit tame, and it was because it went up to the edge, but it didn't cross it. And I thought, you know, we're this far, let's just redo it. So we spent some more money and beefed it up a little bit. And it's only about 80% of what I would have done if I would have done it myself, even now. But generally, I'm pleased with it. And you know, I know a lot of people saw it, and a lot of people thought it was cool. A lot of people hated it. But it got a reaction, and I think that's what's important, you know, rather than just, here's a nice video and we look pretty and we're singing a song, it doesn't mean shit. You know, here's something that I know a lot of people that would have never seen anything like that saw it and were offended by it, but at least they saw it, you know, at least maybe they talked about it and said how much they hated it, which at least is something, you know. So, I mean, I'm pleased with it generally. I think it was the right thing to do, and nobody's really seen it, so someday I'll be a capitalist idiot and put it out for sale and, you know, rip everybody off. So.
On the first album, you worked together with John Fryer and Adrian Sherwood, and then you went in a kind of more metal direction on the new album as well. But the new album is kind of rather diverse, which is very good. So, Flood and Alan Moulder are not that metal music people. So it's Trent Reznor that kind of full metal head.
I mean, with Broken, I wanted to, I was really frustrated. We were at the pinnacle of the battle between record labels. And I was at a point where I was freaked out because of success, for one, because we'd gotten bigger than I felt comfortable being at the time. And I was also faced with the prospect of it all being over because I couldn't make music anymore because of this fucking record label that I was on. And I was having some personal crises at the same time, so it all got focused into that little EP of hate. And I wanted to make something that was aggressive, more aggressive than what I'd done in the past. I'd also discovered what guitar sounded like and real drums and things like that because I'd never really had access to them. I mean, to me, drum was a button on a machine. But after touring for a couple years with real drummers, I understood, wow, it doesn't sound like that button, and I wanted to incorporate some of those sounds. And I'd gotten better at playing guitar just from doing it. And I think I also wanted to completely commercially destroy Nine Inch Nails. So I made that record and I wanted it to sound the way it did. And then, you know, of course, we won a Grammy for it. So from that, though, I also saw where I was boxing myself into a corner that I see other bands do, and I'm not concerned about being the hardest, meanest, snarliest band in the world. And so with Downward Spiral, I started working on computers again more than guitar, and I wrote everything on a computer. And I wanted to make something that went in 10 different directions, but was unified somehow, and that was my challenge to myself musically. And I wanted to explore textures and tension through restraint rather than loud aggressiveness through the whole thing. So that when it did kick in, it was more painful than 40 songs about, you know, loud guitars.
Did you use samples, synths and electronic sounds, or at times use real musicians?
A lot of the stuff on that record that sounds real isn't real, and vice versa. The stuff that sounds fake actually came from real performances that were just processed to the point where it kept the idiosyncrasies of a live performance, but it lost the normal soundingness of it. And I tried to make electronic sound organic, and tried to, instead of making a... It's easy to make a sampler or a synthesizer sound cold and detached, but it's a lot more difficult to try to make it sound real. Not necessarily like a real instrument, but relating to real sounds. A lot of the stuff we use for melodies and things were samples of real organic things like swarms of bees and sounds that you might not hear as that, but hopefully trigger some kind of, you know, a lot of thought went into that kind of shit. And no one will ever notice. Something to spend a lot of time doing.
Did you record this in the Tate Mansion? I think I need to ask this because it's difficult to know if you really knew about the history of the house.
In a nutshell, we were looking for a house to record an album in and set up a studio, to rent a place. Tried to do it in New Orleans where I was living, but there wasn't any places that were right for that. We went to Los Angeles for a day to just see what was there, and there's saw 15 houses, and 15 would have worked. They were all okay. And one of the ones was the Tate house, which we didn't know when we saw it because they didn't tell us when we were there. We were only there for 10 minutes. But what was spectacular about that house is not that someone was killed there. It was, the location is very close to the center of LA, but it's up on a mountain, and it's the most breathtaking view you could ever believe. And a small house, but just had a very remote, isolated feel to it, and it was perfect for what we wanted to do, and it was the cheapest that we'd seen. And later that day, we discovered by accident that that was the house, because someone said, you know, that house is up on that street I think you guys were on today, and found a copy of Helter Skelter and was leafing through it and didn't suspect that was it. And I hadn't even thought of that. I hadn't thought of that murder for 10 years. And when I was looking at pictures and realized, holy fuck, that is that. You know, I was like, whoa, you know. Then it became kind of freaky, but we'd already decided that was the best of the houses that we'd seen. And then I thought, you know, I'll get over that.
But didn't you realize that people would react the way they did when it became known that you used the Tate Mansion?
It's not that big a deal. I wasn't thinking that it would be something I'd have to defend for the next 10 years of my life, but I'm glad we were there, and it wasn't because it was, I mean, it was an interesting bit of history, you know. And the house is virtually unchanged from when that happened. It looks the same. It doesn't now because they tore it down, but we just rented it for a year. And, you know, you'll never know that I'm telling you the truth by saying that, but that was the reason we did it. It was just a cool place. And it was interesting. It wasn't to be spooky, and it wasn't to...
There was also a black cat that lived there. Trent Reznor and black cats seem to go well together, don't they?
We just found it out back one day, and it fed it, and it just wouldn't go away. And it just... There's been 20 wild cats that you'd see once and never see again. This one was always there, so we finally befriended it. And I gave it to a friend of mine, so it's living and fat and healthy.
But your childhood was spent in the countryside, and most people say that Nine Inch Nails sound is really urban. Did growing up in isolated countryside affect you, and did you ever want to escape it?
I think some people have the false impression that, you know, any sort of interesting art or anything must come from an urban area, and I mean, from my travels, everywhere we've been, I've met far more bizarre people that live in the middle of nowhere than live in the middle of New York City, you know. And I don't think it has anything to do with where you are, but I think when you are in an isolated area, a lot of times you don't get input from outside sources that much. So you either stagnate and become like everyone else around you, or you have more of a desire to escape that fate that you've seen everyone around you fall into, which is not necessarily a bad fate, but it wasn't the fate I was going to let myself work at the gas station down the street, you know, or like everyone I knew. I just wanted to get out. I wanted to, you know, there was a world in the television that said there's something out there, but it wasn't within a 200-mile radius of where I was. And I just, I don't know, it was isolating. There's nothing going on. There's nothing to do as a young person. And, you know, so you found things through music, reading, watching movies. You know, that was how you saw the world.
Do you think you have a diverse audience, and your fans and concert goers can relate to you?
Everyone can relate, you know. So, and I don't think that necessarily has to do with living in the country or not. You know, just when I grew up was what I thought was stupid, you know. You know, if you're a big super athlete, you're the greatest person in the world, you know, who gives a fuck? What does that mean, you know? Or if you're, whatever it is, you know, I didn't fit in that much to those scenes, so I didn't want to.
Sometimes you come across as quite aggressive in your lyrics and your videos. Doesn't this bother you? And don't you worry that people will perceive this as being overindulgent?
I just think I set out to make an extreme sounding record, you know, and I found like in the European press, the favorite mode of attacking me seems to be, which I think was started by like the fucking NME and those idiots, was, oh, this can't be real, it's all fabricated, and, you know, if he meant it, he'd be dead already, and all this kind of nonsense, you know. How do I sit here and say, yeah, I meant it? And what can I say to you to say, I've thought these things? And it puts me in a strange position of trying to justify myself, which I don't feel I need to do, you know. I agree, it's extreme, you know, it's over the top. It's the equivalent of a movie with 500 people getting their guts ripped out, you know. It was meant to be that, you know. I might have been exploring subtlety on a musical level on this record, but I wasn't lyrically, you know. So I open myself up for that, and I think it's also fair criticism too. And it's something I plan on hoping to move out of, you know. But this record, that was the kind of parameters I was working within. So
I know you've worked with her. You know Tori Amos
already, you know, that's kind of.
She said some nice things about you in interviews. Do you think you've got something in common, and therefore do you get along well?
Someone tried to get me to listen to her record, the first one I came out, and I didn't, because someone described it as similar to, they incorrectly described it as something to do with Sinead O'Connor, which I cannot stand. So I just didn't listen to it for a long time, and I finally did. It went on to be, like, I thought, an amazingly good record, although not the kind of record I would normally like. It really hit home, and I listened to it a lot, and then I put it away, and then when I was doing Downward Spiral, when I was working with Flood every day, we were driving every day. We went out to lunch, and my car had that CD, and he'd never heard it. And every single day, we'd listen to it and just sit quietly. And at a certain point, we'd both go, wow, that was fucking great, you know, and just make comments. And it was really weird, and I thought, you know, I've never approached anybody, but I feel I should, like, just make contact and say, you know, I really like what you do, and your new record had just come out. And that same day, I got a phone call saying she was in town and wanted to meet me for some reason, and it just seemed weird. And we hooked up, and instantly it was like a good friend, someone I know somehow. You know, we tried to stay in touch, and then I just saw her in London not too long ago. Just, I don't know. She's a nice person. We're friends.
It's just a final question to finish. You talk about a fame kind of thing in interviews, and there's certain people you don't want to become like, and yet there are other people you respect, like guitarist Adrian Bellew. Is it important for you to retain a certain respect and level of humanity?
I haven't worked with that many people because I'm intimidated by it. I'm not so much anymore. When I worked with Adrian, I realized there's a guy that's like a guitar hero of mine, and he was a cool guy, and it wasn't that bad, and he respected me, and it was a pleasant experience. You know, you meet Prince, and he's a little shrimpy freak that is living in another world, and when you lose any degree of humanity where you can even talk to somebody as a human being, you've crossed the line into someone I don't want to deal with at any level, you know.